How are you, Jason?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I was trying to figure out the chat to say hi back, and
Oh, no, that's fine.
I'm just amazed that we just had snow out there. I'm doing.
Isn't it hysterical?
Yeah, because I'm doing pavers, concrete pavers, and so I just literally this morning had the sand brought in and the pavers because I put the gravel out, and I'm like, are you kidding me? So
now it's turned. It was slushy snow here, but it's just turned back to more rain now. The dog with me here. I am waiting for the lead sponsor. Ellie, do we know if Councilor Campbell is on her way?
Yes, you should be joining shortly. Thank you.
Oh, there she is.
okay, and I don't see Tiara, so let me
Thank
just
you, Councilor Sabi
ping
George.
her.
Great.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Apologies, I was here.
Oh, you were maybe just in the weight room.
Yeah, but I'm here.
Oh, good, because my panic was like,
No, trust me, I was 10 minutes early, Jason. Like this.
And I'm going to promote the panelists. A couple of, I'm not sure if that's Carrie behind the City Council Zoom. I noticed a few hands up on promoting them to panelist.
Thank you, Councillor. I was hiding behind the screen as well. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And share it. Okay. All right, I've got one more in there. All right, so I think that we've promoted everyone that is in the way. Oh, Annie. I don't have Annie Taylor on my list of panelists. Councilor Campbell, is Annie on the panel?
She is our data and evaluation person for the department.
so if you guys have follow-up questions around data, she'd be good to invite.
All right, I just admitted.
Okay.
Councilor Campbell, if you are ready, and
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Councilor Sabi George.
City
Thank
Council,
you, everyone.
Central staff, are we ready to get started?
Madam Chair, ready to go when you are.
Very good. Let's get to my notes so I say the right thing. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anissa Sabi George, and I'm the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Education. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. Today's hearing is on docket number 0359 in order for a hearing regarding the status of universal pre-K given the COVID-19 pandemic. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Vios Channel 964. We will take public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you wish to testify, please email ron.cobb, that's ron.cobb at boston.gov to sign up. When you are called, please state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes to ensure that all comments can be heard. You may also submit written testimony by emailing ccc.education@boston.gov. Today, I'm joined by our lead sponsor, Councilor Campbell, and other colleagues. I noted that Councilor Julia Mejia has joined us, as well as Councilor Breeden. Excellent. Sorry, looking at my screen, making sure I see everyone. And we're also joined by a number of panelists. And I will say that today's conversation will be led, or the panelists will be led by Dr. Jason Sachs, who's the BPS Early Childhood Education Coordinator, or the Director of, and then Tiara Diaz, who is Director of Boston Universal Pre-K, as well as a number of others who will be joined, who will join us for conversation and presentation. I'll now welcome the lead sponsor of today's hearing, Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George, and thank you all for being here today. I know how busy folks are, so I really appreciate the work you continue to do in this space. And of course, you guys taking time out of your busy schedule to join the conversation. We all know, of course, that early education and childcare are absolutely essential to setting up our young people for future success in schools and careers. And I think more folks are discovering just how important it is to our economy and, of course, rebuilding a strong Boston economy. Families from across the city have long, frankly, criticized Boston Public Schools for how difficult it can be to navigate the application process, to be selected, of course, for a coveted pre-K seat for your 3-year-old or 4-year-old. As a mother of a 3-year-old, I tried to get one of those seats and got a letter saying you're on a wait list. So I know very much how it feels. And so, of course, this hearing is designed to figure out how we actually get at universal pre-K and do it as a collective, hearing what has already been done and hearing, of course, where we need to continue our efforts and invest more. At the heart of this issue, of course, the city continues in many ways to narrowly define pre-K rather than adopt a more robust and expansive definition of universal pre-K. So during the hearing, I would love to hear from all of the panelists how they define universal pre-K. I say it's from birth to 5 years old. And I think it's really important that we continue to frame it in such a way. In addition to the definition, how do we, of course, expand the necessary infrastructure that will allow every family in the city of Boston not only the tools and resources they would need to navigate an application process, but also do everything we can to ensure that every family in the city of Boston has access to a high quality, affordable childcare and a pre-K experience for their child. With COVID-19 and this incredible pandemic, of course, that is still very much hurting all of us, the challenge has only been exacerbated by the many nonprofit and community-based organizations who are in a budgetary crisis and who, frankly, have not been adequately responded to by our government. I'm really excited, of course, with the new federal administration and the resources they are sending to municipalities, including the city of Boston, seeing this as a way in which to invest in those businesses that have just been devastated in this industry because of COVID. And looking forward to hearing more from the panelists on how we do a better job there. Today, of course, I also look forward to learning about the status of the city's pre-K investment in the expansion of seats for 4-year-olds, where we are, particularly timely as we're going into budget season. I also look forward to hearing more about the opportunities for us to expand access to high-quality pre-K seats for families, assistance for community-based organizations and providers in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And lastly, how we create a more comprehensive plan to truly realize universal pre-K in the city of Boston. And I think in many ways lead every municipality in the country with respect to this issue. So thank you all so very much for the work you're doing. Looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you, Councilman Sabi George. And I have to give a shout out to my chief of staff, Ellie, for coordinating all of this as well. So thank you, Ellie. I don't do this work by myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Campbell. And I also want to note that we've been joined by Councilors Edwards and Bach for this morning's hearing. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. When Mayor Walsh provided the funding for the 2019 to create UPK seats in Boston, the hope was that these seats would even out the playing field, build in educational equity for our earliest learners. Right now, there are just about half of the 4-year-olds. There are seats for just about half of the 4-year-olds in Boston in a very long wait list. In July, I learned and heard from a group of parents, including one of our panelists today, that the connector system between UPK and BPS was not operational for the fall, despite the many promises that it would be. Getting UPK right for our families means that our students will be ready for K-12 education, improving BPS enrollment and student success. I look forward to UPK being available to every student with the seamless transition to BPS, ensuring generations of preschool-aged children are excited and ready to learn for kindergarten at BPS. With that, I'd like to turn this hearing over to our first panelist, Dr. Sachs.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And we can just start with introductions. So Tiara is going to introduce herself, then I'm going to introduce myself, and then we will tell you exactly, whoops, hang on. Then we'll,
always nice to bring a little music into the space.
I know it's my phone.
I love it.
All right. So anyways, Tiara, why don't you introduce yourself and then
Awesome. And thank you again, counselors, for having us. I am so excited to be here. I probably shouldn't be that excited about a order, but I really am, just to really share our work about Universal Pre-K. My name is Tiara Dias. I am the Universal Pre-K Director. I started in this role in 2019. Prior to that, I managed the Preschool Expansion Grant from 2015 to 2019. And prior to that, I worked for 19 years at Bright Horizons. I worked in every position from birthday bear, handing out pizza, to teacher, to director, to regional education trainer, prior to moving into my Preschool Expansion Grant work. Thank you again for having us, and I'm going to pass it over to Jason.
Okay, and I'm Jason Sachs. I have been in Massachusetts and Boston for the last 25 years. Actually, my first work in community-based programs was with Nurtury, which then was called Associated Daycare. So it's nice to see how it all comes back around. And then while I was there, I worked on a dissertation studying the impact of what is quality in early education, and then what does quality look like for students who are low income or don't have access to as much. And then basically took that work to the state, went and worked at the Department of Education. We administered grants across the state, one of which was Community Partnerships for Children, but it also gave out the full day kindergarten grant and did some home visiting. So it kind of gave me the birth to 5 perspective, and then also a linkage into the public schools. Then I was invited about 14 years ago to come work to help then Mayor Menino think about what universal preschool might look like in the Boston public schools. We started in the public schools, but we had always had the question of what about community-based programs? And now I've had the pleasure of working with Tiara now to do universal preschool. And as you can see, our vision, Councillor Campbell actually said it better than we did. This is the vision, right? We want a birth to five high quality instruction, loving and caring programs. And so we're here to co-construct it with all of our partners and you all. So we're excited. And I just want to praise Tiara as she's going to take us through these slides. Tiara has basically worried about every detail of this program and has a team of people who are working with her. And I think later on you'll hear from some of our partners and community-based providers. So Tiara is going to take it away. And then when we get to the research part, I'm going to chime back in, and then we're here to answer all your questions.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jason. And just a highlight of the agenda today, the plan is to give you the overview of Boston UPK, including our governance model, highlight some big accomplishments in our year 1 and year 2. We are going to spend a few slides talking about the impact that COVID has had on our community-based programs and our families. And then we'll wrap up with our goals for year 3, which start on July 1. And I also would like to highlight a few key pieces in our strategic plan, I think related, Councillor Campbell, to your reference to birth to 3, as well as before and after care. So yeah, we'll highlight some pieces of our strategic plan. I think it's important to just ground us as we think about the Boston Universal Pre-K model to know that every decision is really guided by our invested stakeholders. Well, Jason, thank you so much for praising me. But I have to say that I am an extension of our community-based organizations, which includes our YMCAs, our nurseries, EBA, Hattie B. Cooper, Little Voices, Horizons for Homeless Children, and I'm sure I forgot at least 9. But they are really, as Jason indicated, have been our partners in building this system, along with places like the Boston Opportunity Agenda, Boston Family Engagement Network, Children's Hospital, Boston Medical Center. All of these invested stakeholders are part of our governance model. You can see here at the bottom of the screen that in addition to our CBOs and our partners, it also includes our Family Council, which I'll talk more about later, as well as our advisory committee. And that is a group of experts from philanthropy, business, higher education, the City of Boston, and Boston Public Schools. And again, I've also included all of the links to our governance model at the end of these slides. I have to also acknowledge our BPS partners that have helped us from the very start to develop the UPK model as well. And so that's special education, the Office of English Language Learners, Welcome Center, data and analysis, and there's so many of them to name. But I just really wanted to highlight the importance that as we're building this model, it is really a group effort. And every decision and process, we bring those recommendations to the superintendent, to the school committee, as well as the mayor of Boston. So as you indicated, Mayor Walsh funded Boston Universal Pre-K in April of 2019 with $15 million. And again, it was formed not just by the historical work, but there's a 2016 advisory report to which the advisory committee prior provided recommendations on how to roll out Boston UPK. And so we went into Universal Pre-K fully funded. What we do is we blend our Universal Pre-K funds with Boston Public Schools general funds, as well as private and philanthropy funding. Our community-based organizations receive $11K per child. In addition, they blend their funds with the EEC subsidy program. And then we created access to additional funds through like our grants, as well as our equity fund. I do want to highlight that 77% of the UPK funding goes directly to supporting our families and children at no cost to them. And then 23% of our funding goes to building the infrastructure that will sustain UPK long term. It is a mixed delivery system. And what that means is that we want to make sure that every 4-year-old and 3-year-olds, which we'll talk about next, has access to high quality. And I'm going to talk more about those quality indicators, but I also just want to mention that while we have started in BPS district and branched off into our community-based organizations, we've also moved into non-traditional schools and are thinking deeply about family childcare and the ways that they can participate in universal pre-K as well. And when we say high quality, we have a specific definition that was included in the recommendations from the advisory report. So that means things like national standards set by NACE, which is the National Association for the Education of Young Children. It includes standards set by the state, which is the Quality Rating and Improvements Scale. And so those quality indicators are not just practices or rather requirements of UPK, but supports and coaching that we also provide. When we say quality, we're talking about family engagement and comprehensive services. So that means health, vision, nutrition, hearing, and dental, not just in our programs, but outside of our programs. When we talk about quality, we're talking about evidence-based curriculum. Our focus on K-1 curriculum starts in K-1, goes to K-2, first and second. And we provide coaching, sometimes 3-4 times a week, sometimes twice a month in our community-based organizations as well. And lastly, when we talk about quality, we're talking about our teachers and our family engagement coordinators and our directors receiving a salary that's equivalent to the Boston Public Schools salaries, as well as the professional development opportunities that our BPS teachers receive. And in year one, we really focused on highlighting and clarifying what those quality indicators were. We built the infrastructure and we started to form our partnerships. I mentioned our advisory committee. And together with them in April of 2019, we were able to select 429 seats across 17 organizations in Boston. I've included at the end of the slide a map so you can see where all of those are laid out. But as you can see, we funded, that was across 36 classrooms. Once we had our community-based programs on board, we met monthly and worked together, as I indicated, to really solidify the written policies and guidance for universal pre-K. So we developed our professional development model. We partnered with UMass to move our focus on K-1 course to be credit bearing. We launched a really big implementation guide that includes all the written policies of universal pre-K. And while all that work was happening, with the approval of the superintendent, we launched an internal working group to really think about how we were going to incorporate many of the UPK model into Boston Public Schools. So that included thinking through the connector, streamlining communications, ensuring special education supports. All of those factors were thought through with our BPS departments. And I have to mention that in addition to the cross-department work, we formed, as I mentioned, some partnerships with places like Children's Hospital, Boston Family Engagement Network, and gosh, I'm drawing a blank. I apologize. But we did highlight all of our partners at the end of the slide. There's lots of them. So we are going to dive into the impacts of COVID on our community-based programs and our families. But I wanted to take a second here in this slide to just note some of the work that continued in year 2. And while a lot of this is related to COVID, I think it highlights our community's commitment and resilience to focus on quality and really build a sustainable model. So again, in the second year, we increased the number of seats. We went from 429 to 571, and we went up to 41 classrooms. In addition, we created a pathway for beginning programs. So these are non-traditional schools that still needed additional support to build capacity and meet the UPK quality indicators. We also supported some of those programs in year 2. We developed a shared enrollment system called Schoolmint. And what this system does is it allows a family to see our link on a MBTA or on our website and just simply put in their information. And from there, our family engagement coordinator, and as well as the community-based organization, they reach out to the family. They tell them more about the programs. They help them rank their UPK sites. And from there, the community-based organization is able to connect with the family and walk them through the full registration process. So that's one thing that we were able to implement last year that we believe really streamlines the registration process for our families. We were also able to launch the connector when we received approval from the school committee in September of 2020. And what the connector does is it creates 2 new priorities in the Boston Public Schools lottery system for our UPK children in specific schools. And I want to note what those priorities are. So the first priority is for low-income UPK students, and then the second priority is for non-low-income UPK students. So what that means is that our students have a higher likeliness of getting into their K-2 school of option. And we have provided tons of supports and will continue to provide tons of supports to make sure that families are aware of the connector, register early. We've launched parent cafes, but also because of the shared enrollment system, we're able to streamline the pre-registration process for UPK families. I am so proud about our special education work. Last year, we were able to add 2.5 FTEs for speech and occupational therapy in our UPK classrooms, which means that our classrooms now receive direct support from a team of 4 people in related services. And from there, this team not only provides direct supports, but a series of professional development. They have created a written referral process and together helped me form a working group. That working group includes the Boston Public Health Commission, Children's Hospital, Early Intervention, EEC, Boston Medical Center, and together we work to develop policies, written policies for special education. And we also identified 2 immediate gaps in our model because of this working group and because of the work of related services. One being behavioral health supports, which we will increase in the upcoming year, as well as supports for non-UPK students, which we're thinking through now. And lastly, I just want to highlight our Family Council. Families are really at the center of the work that we do. And when we created our Family Council, we really wanted to make sure that they were embedded in our UPK model as a voice in the decision-making process, whether it's curriculum, policy, or getting to our underrepresented families. We want to make sure that we use our Family Council to do that. We now have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. We have representatives from each one of our community-based organizations. And the great part about this council is that it starts at UPK and K1. It's going to grow to K2, first and second. So I'm super excited about our Family Council. I'm going to pass it over to Jason, who's going to talk a little bit about the impacts COVID had on our community-based programs, as well as our families. And I'll jump back in to talk about year 3.
Okay, thank you, Tiara. So part of the implementation of UPK, we asked for a couple research grants to help do some implementation science. And so we were able to partner with folks. So even though we weren't able to go into classrooms as much, we were able to do some implementation science. And this is some of the findings from the research. So what we found in this program is that teacher turnover was about 18%. And just to give you context, it generally runs about 30 to 35%, though in some programs it's more. But because of UPK, we have been able, because we're paying higher salaries, we've been able to see a lower turnover rate. I don't know exactly the number, but it was probably around 10 to 15%. And you can see with COVID, it's about 18%. 47% of UPK centers lost at least one teacher, and the turnover rate among directors was 10%. So just to give you a sense of turnover rate. Some of the things that UPK's team did to sort of respond to that was we added additional coaching support for new staff. We did a lot of remote coffee hours and social emotional workshops to help teachers both just deal with their own family issues, the students' family issues, and then support each other as kids were in the classrooms, just over fears and PPE concerns. But it's been really a remarkable support network. And in fact, that network informed the public schools as we rolled out to serve some young children. All right, so we've also done some recruitment and retention support. One of the things Tiara is actually really big on from Bright Horizons is how do you help retain your staff? And then we also worked with Bunker Hill Community College. They did some intern support, and I think next year they're really talking about providing teacher placements as well. So we're pretty excited about that. All right, so on to the next slide. And what you can see is that on enrollment, and so just to set a little context, for community-based programs, their capacity was lowered. I believe it went from like 20 to allowing programs to serve 10 kids. So these are in percentages, but they're not necessarily the same number of students. 86% of the CBO seats were filled pre-pandemic. By winter of 2021, we were at about 70% in community-based programs. Of the enrolled students, 70% were in-person, 11% were hybrid, and 19% were fully remote, just to give you a sense of the scale. And again, in support of them, we enhanced family engagement. We did the newsletter. We used, actually in the public schools, we use Seesaw. We will continue to get Seesaw into community-based programs so that they can also use electronic supports. We streamlined the enrollment process, which Tiara already talked about. And enrollment in September, we've already allowed people to start enrolling families for next year, and that's online. Because one of the challenges that we'll talk about is currently, because we're marrying two systems, this community-based system and the public school. In the community-based programs, we are allowing them to enroll students. And in the public schools, obviously, you go through our system. And so that's one of the challenges and opportunities that I think we'll be talking about later on. Okay, next slide. You can see we asked them how many operational adaptations they did. On average, there was 21 changes for programs, which is a lot. And on the right of this slide, you can see some of the things that programs worked on. So some had to remove centers. There was more time for individual play. They had to use visible markers for personal space. So you can just sort of see the changes that were going on in programs. And in order to keep instruction and support, we really did a lot of coaching. The other thing we did is we started an equity fund. One of the things is before we gave each program the same amount of money for UPK, and obviously if you have students who have varying needs, we created an equity fund to help programs if they needed translation or if they needed more social work or they needed more support. This equity fund, they could apply to us to kind of tilt the equity. And so we spent about $98,000 this year. I assume next year we'll even spend more. It's a growing program. We also created in the Boston Public Schools and for the UPK remote curriculum guides. Basically, my team shifted from doing in-person coaching to writing curriculum guides, and again, supporting the implementation of those guides. So children were getting strong, engaging, developmentally appropriate, social emotionally supported curriculum. And then again, we did one-on-one coaching, and we did funding for 600 remote individual learning kits. So if you ever came to the BLA parking lot on one day, you would have seen our whole team packing up these kits. And then by the second wave, we got a lot smarter at it, and we found a distribution company that helped put together these kits. But basically, kids need materials at home, and they need to interact. And so we spent a lot of our COVID time putting together kits. All right, the next slide. All right, so now we get to talk about 3-year-olds. So clearly, there's going to be some learning loss that has happened due to COVID and just being away from school. And frankly, we should be doing universal preschool for 3-year-olds as well. And so now we're really thinking about how do we go about and start serving 3-year-olds. And Tiara is going to talk about that in the strategic plan in a bit. But what we're thinking, just to lay it out, is that the community-based providers would be the major source of serving 3-year-olds. But there are about 800 seats in the public schools that have inclusion classrooms. And so that could expand the space for 3-year-olds in the public schools as well. Those would be only in inclusion classrooms. But currently we have 4-year-olds in those seats because we just don't typically serve 3-year-olds. We have a small number of 3-year-olds, as I think someone alluded to. But this would allow us to expand potentially 400 to 800 kids in the public schools. Potentially, we have to look at the impacts of all of that. There's a whole trickle effect of that. And then in community-based programs, we were really thinking of matching sort of what we're doing in pre-K. So we're talking maybe 4,000 seats of UPK in community-based programs. But again, we'll walk you through our logic on all of this in a minute. Okay, and then I want you to know that we're also, and this is where Annie comes in, we have done a fair amount of analysis of neighborhood by neighborhood, and we're looking at both BPS capacity and community-based capacity. And so the blue graph, or the blue bar, represents, I believe, the kindergarten 2 enrollment, because that's what we use as our proxy measure to kind of say how many kids would use a publicly funded system, because K2 is what everybody would come to, and we feel sort of that's our universe. And then you can see here that we picked 5 neighborhoods, and sometimes it's not a capacity issue, it's getting the programs into a place where they can be high enough quality, and so we have to provide supports for them to help them get there. And that's where this partnership is. And then in some place there is not enough capacity, and so we'll have to think through in neighborhoods particular targeting or expansion of schools or expansion in community-based programs. So I think that's sort of where we are, neighborhood by neighborhood, and we've done that work. I think that's the end of me, right, Tiara?
I think so. Yeah, I would just like to highlight a few other things that Jason kind of already touched on. One, as far as getting to 4-year-olds, we are prepared to increase our universal pre-K seats this year to 750 seats, including new community-based partners. So any family who wants a seat in BPS or UPK, we're prepared to connect them. As Jason indicated, there are seats available. It's really a matter of making sure that families are aware and that they are of high quality. And that's where our focus will be for this year. Jason also mentioned that we are going to allow for up to 25% of UPK's classroom to also fund 3-year-olds. So we will have these mixed age classrooms for 3 and 4-year-olds. And in addition to that, through our EEC Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative, we're also funding an additional 4 classrooms, 50 seats total, of 3-year-olds, so that we're going to have information on 3-year-old classrooms as well as a mixed age classroom. And we know we have to be more targeted and intentional around our recruitment. And so we are going to be reaching out to members across our community to help us connect with families, but also making sure that we are going into the community and talking to healthcare centers, community resource centers, shelters, radio, media, and really soliciting as much support from our city councilors to connect families and make them aware of the community-based option. I also wanted to highlight that we are expanding our supports beyond our UPK programs to include non-UPK programs. So citywide, we're working with the Boston Opportunity Agenda and United Way to think through how do we ensure that the ages and stages screenings are available to all families. Families First offers an awesome Power of Parenting workshop for 12 weeks, and we want to expand that citywide this year. And lastly, for our educators, really broaden the professional learning communities so that we're offering credit-bearing courses through UMass, expanding that related services series that I mentioned earlier to any educator across Boston, and then forming a working group to help us think through family childcare, everything from compensation to funding for the space, as well as curriculum use. Our special education work will continue. So we're adding on some behavioral health supports this year. We're drafting up a written policy for non-UPK children. And we're going to continue that working group to help us develop the written policies and address any sort of gaps that we can identify in this year. And I've already talked a lot about this professional development. I just want to mention that it's not just limited to teachers, that we also focus on our directors and our family engagement coordinators. And here's a snapshot of our strategic plan. We talked a lot about some of these, but just to highlight that we recognize that the universal pre-K model really should include 0 to 8. This year, we're adding on a partnership with Boston Basics. We are on the subcommittee for 0 to 3 with United Way, and we're going to continue to work to build out this model, starting with the 3-year-olds. We haven't talked a lot about out-of-school time, but part of the quality alignment between Boston Public Schools and community-based organization is also looking at out-of-school time. And we are certainly thinking about, as Jason indicated, the learning loss and how to already started ordering those remote kits and those in-person kits and planning the curriculum for this upcoming summer. As I mentioned, we have included tons of resources, and everything that we've talked about here is hyperlinked. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight the many partners that have helped us build this Boston UPK model. Thank you so much for allowing us to present.
Tiara, thank you. Dr. Sachs, thank you very much for that presentation. We've since also been joined by Councilor Arroyo to this afternoon's hearing. Madam Sponsor, I'm not sure who is next on your, who will be presenting on your panels. It's just in order as it was presented to me. So I'm not sure if Amy, Dina, Laura, Kate, Sharon.
That's fine, Councilor Sabi George, the order that was presented, and I'll let everyone go, and then we can all ask questions so folks have a chance to speak before we get 2 hours in. Thank you.
So next on my list, I have Amy and then Dina.
Good afternoon. I'm Amy O'Leary. I'm the Early Education Frog Campaign Director at Strategies for Children. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm so glad to follow Jason and Tiara because they really provided a strong context of what's currently happening with the Boston UPK program. I also want to thank our elected and appointed leaders. We're so grateful for the decisions that you have made and how you have supported children and families over the past year. As we've heard, the health crisis has highlighted so many inequities of our systems, but it has also raised this broad, concrete awareness of how integral these systems are to the economy and to the future of the Commonwealth. In June, we, along with 30 other organizations, developed a collective statement on racial justice. And the last few lines read, "We call on our elected officials at the federal, state, and local level to examine policies, funding, and practices with regard to racial disparities. We call on Governor Baker and the legislature to continue the racial and gender implications of major structural changes to childcare in the short and the long term. We cannot keep adding to the ranks of the working poor, especially disadvantaging women of color for whom the costs of inequitable compensation are greater. We recommit ourselves to achieving racial equity in the early childhood and school-age programs through advocacy, action, and policy change. And together we will stand up, speak out, and work to dismantle historical systems of racism and inequality." And as I sit here today, I'm thinking of all the incredible stories that we heard from educators, program directors, family child care providers, school-age staff, CEOs, and community leaders who have shown up for children and families every single day since the pandemic hit. We continue to be inspired by this dedicated and resilient workforce and for their commitment to problem solving, building partnerships, and providing high quality learning experiences under these incredible circumstances. We know we cannot return to the things as they were before COVID. This is an opportunity in this disruption to be shocked out of the way that we have been doing things. We cannot call childcare essential for the economy and then continue to have 37% of early educators eligible for some sort of public assistance. We cannot make decisions about the K-12 side of things without considering the implications for babies, toddlers, preschoolers, before and after school, and summer vacations. We have set up systems and silos that are no longer viable, and we must work together to build back stronger. Now our eyes are open, and we know that the old ways did not work for most people. We know that programs are going to need flexible, stable, additional funds to have a chance in this new reality. And then we know that parent demand, employer decisions, and what happens with K-12 will impact both the short term and long term. Families do not live in funding streams. We have created so many artificial barriers and limitations. And now we have a chance to do something about it. As a statewide policy and advocacy organization, we get the opportunity to watch many different communities grapple with these issues. And the good news is the city of Boston has a history of prioritizing these issues and people working together to find solutions, including putting city money into the mix. Holding this hearing today is one more signal for the strong commitment of the leadership in Boston. And as we plan for the future, we should be asking questions like, how do we make sure that every child is safe, has access to programs to support their physical and mental health, and are being supported with transitions now in the summer and the fall? How are we adjusting and adapting as families return to work? What should programs look like? What do children need, and what do parents want? And how are we supporting the workforce through compensation, mental health supports, access to benefits, and healthcare? If we work to maximize and leverage and coordinate existing resources, advocate for equitable policies, and keep children and families at the center, we can deliver on the promise we have made for ensuring high-quality early education in the city. Hearing the real day-to-day challenges has helped inform our advocacy and must drive our policy decisions and help us match up the resources with needs. And while we can rely on the innovation and creativity and can-do attitude of the early education and care community, that will not be enough. As we look to the future, we have some thoughts and ideas about what we can do. As Councillor Campbell said, language matters. So having a clear citywide definition is critical as we think about moving forward. This will also help in understanding the early childhood landscape, birth through 5, for what's available for children, what parents and families want for their children, and what the gap is. And it's been my understanding that the Boston's challenge is not necessarily the number of pre-K seats. It's how we account for and support and fund these seats. We know that all are not free and that all are not of equal quality, and that should be the goal. We need to launch a full-blown public education campaign to really encourage participation in the system. Sometimes we can give word problem answers to simple questions, so we need a clear and concise way of talking about our vision. We also want to think about using a combination of the COVID recovery dollars, city budget, and state resources to guarantee high-quality programs for first 3 and 4-year-olds, making sure that they do meet the standards that we have set out. And I just also want to acknowledge the work that has happened through the Early Childhood Department, the partnership, the hours and hours and hours of negotiation, and making sure we don't have unintended consequences as we think about the policy that is developed has been critical. Also, making grant funding available to early education providers that aren't in the system for them to think about how they are going to meet and maintain the standards that we're putting forward. We know this includes compensation, and we know this also includes looking at your program holistically. Also thinking about what funds could be available to help restore the capacity. We know in Boston, it's been many family childcare providers have closed, but really understanding the landscape of what it looks like to restore what we've lost, and then really beginning the foundation for thinking about children birth through 3. We also know that there's a legislative proposal at the State House, the Common Start legislation, which is calling for universal childcare from birth through 5. So that should be part of the consideration as decisions are made in Boston. The childcare crisis needed to be made real to make the general public maybe be real and seen, so that the general public with babies and toddlers joining work Zooms, the stories of parents quitting jobs or turning them down due to the lack of childcare. We must ask ourselves, what would it look like if we were a city that really put young children and families first? It is not just the role of government. Everybody has a role to play. It is time for systemic change, and we are here to help support the work in Boston. I really appreciate the opportunity of being with you here today. Look forward to the discussion and continuing our work together.
Thank you very much, Amy. Dina, I think, is next on my list. Welcome, Dina.
Hey, I'm Dinah.
Dinah, sorry about that.
It's okay. My name is Dinah Shepard. Thanks for having me. This is exciting, and I'm very nervous to be with all these important people, so bear with me.
No one's more important than you at this moment.
Oh, God bless you. I am a co-founder and co-director of a small community organization called First Teacher. So we are a community of parents and caregivers working together to prepare our kids to be school and world ready. We're 8 years old. In real life, we sit on the first floor of the Atkins building between Merengues and the Haynes. Right now, we are all virtual. Originally, our mission, we believed, was school readiness, and community building with families was secondary. It became very clear that it's the opposite. So our true mission is building community with families of young children in service of ensuring that families and children are ready for school. For my comments, I went the angle that Ellie gave me about what families feel is missing from this conversation. And actually, Tiara and Amy already spoke to so much of this, which is actually really amazing. But I am part of a family group through First Teacher called a Parent Virtual Commiseration Party. We have 3 of them a week, 2 in English, 1 in Spanish. And so as soon as I got this invite, I texted 9 of the parents that are part of my Parent Virtual Commiseration Party to ask them what they would like me to bring today in response to the question, what's missing from the conversation? Especially as a white woman with children that are no longer 0 to 5, I'm not comfortable speaking on behalf of families, so I brought their words with me. These are from Black and brown parents, moms, dads, grandmothers. Mainly their children are 2 to 6 years old. Most of their children are in BPS, some are in childcare, et cetera. So when I asked them what they wanted me to say is missing from the conversation, this is the list, and I'll read it fairly slowly, but it won't take the 5 minutes, so don't worry. Families said they want a way for informal childcare family members to be compensated and get access to trainings. They want to have an online family hub where there's more comprehensive lists about sports programs, childcare, public playing fields and parks that are safe for them. A big one is that families said so much of this work could be taken care of if there were more safe, accessible community spaces where families with young children could actually meet and build social capital and share information and build networks. Families want an actual, transparent, back to care, back to school transition plan focused on social emotional care. And Tiara, I really heard you speak to that, so thank you. Families want affordable daycare hours that make sense for working families. Families want more outdoor, free, consistent activities for children 0 to 3, not just starting at 6. Along with that, many families talked about how we need more summer programs for children that are in K0 and K1 because they lose childcare spots when they take these preschool seats. Families want more community-centered and community-located support to help manage our children's social emotional struggles in school. Families want more free passes to museums through our libraries and think passes should be available for every BPS student. I'm more than halfway through the list. Families want more childcare summer and tutoring accessibility for families that fall into the not too broke to qualify, but too broke to pay category. More programming where spots are saved for families that are financially in need, but where all of our kids in economic brackets can build friendships together. Families want more bilingual childcare programs. Families want more partnerships with Smart from the Start, First Teacher, and ABCD who have real relationships with families, maybe a better bridge from these organizations to schools. And then 2 direct quotes. If there is another surge in the fall, is there a clear plan that we can see beforehand about how we can make this better, especially for our youngest children and our children on the autism spectrum? My son cannot learn on a screen, and I have given up trying to make him. And finally, will there be a way for parents to share feedback about what we saw this year? I know teachers have been heroes this year, but I have also witnessed people speak to my children in ways that are not appropriate and not acceptable. It was a mixed blessing that I was able to see into their school world, but what I was seeing did not always sit right with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinah, for that. Next, we have Laura. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Counselor and Chair of the committee. And I want to thank both you, Chair, and also Counselor Campbell, but all the counselors who are gathered here and the time and focus that you are putting into this issue and the questions that you are calling. Ellie sent me a raft of questions, and I'm glad I'm joined by my peers. I'm hoping that between the 3 of us, we will capture a lot. So I won't initially spend time on the experience of what's going on during the pandemic, although all of us have stories to tell. And I want to just dive a little bit into the vision, which I think is so robust here. I think universal childcare, and I do prefer that term, or universal early education and care, I think it encompasses the entire landscape of childcare, is absolutely the right priority, and it should be led by the city, certainly in collaboration with many partners, with the school system, and of course with the state, but led by the city because of the diversity and broadness of the network and the needs of families and children, especially as we move younger and younger. I remark that just a couple of days ago this week, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston was on WBUR. And, you know, I don't spend a lot of time with bankers, but I really did appreciate that he was preaching to our choir when he pointed out that one of the challenges that the pandemic has highlighted is how inadequate the entire system and fabric of childcare is, and that now is a good time for the U.S. to evaluate whether we should have a more comprehensive childcare system. And so, coming as I do from my K-12 background, I have to say that the significance of moving toward universal childcare as a public good is incredibly important. A couple of things I would love for counselors in the city to think about as you consider the expansion and obviously the incredible partnership of BPS and its work here and many providers is that the importance of preserving and operating through a mixed delivery model is critical, particularly as we move to younger children. That's been an important value of universal pre-K, and it needs to be a very high standard when we move to younger and younger ages of children. The one thing I can say, Nurtury, I did not adequately introduce my organization, but we are a 140-year-old childcare institution operating largely in the city of Boston. We operate 5 centers, 4 in the city, 1 in Cambridge. We also support an incredibly vibrant family childcare system and network of family childcare educators. And in fact, of the nearly 950 children we are serving. So the one data point I will give you is that Nurtury was serving over 1,000 children before the pandemic. We operated emergency care during the peak of the early months, and then we began reopening in July. And we now have 950 children back in care. That's 88% of our pre-COVID service levels. But what's really remarkable is that our centers have repopulated at about just under 70% of their pre-COVID enrollment, our family childcare is repopulated at 102% of its pre-COVID levels. And I want to mention that diversity because what families are choosing and what works for them needs to be an incredibly important pillar of any system that is built. And so those are really important numbers. The other principle is no wrong door. That there, and these are terms that have been worked around the UPK table, but I'm bringing them back because they are so important. So no wrong door means that people should be able to enter through multiple settings, not just CBO and school, but part-time and full-time, family childcare settings and center-based settings. And so all of those need to be encompassed. My father always used to remind me that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think it is incredibly important that we realize that we have a lot of tools in our early education landscape, and we have to meet families where they are and respect their needs. It goes to things as practical as how the enrollment system works, which I think warrants a lot more feedback and a lot more looking at, but I'll stay at the high level around the ambition. I think my third point is that particularly around the no wrong door, as BPS considers, and really the city considers, how does it meet the full spectrum with BPS as one of the players and many other parts of the landscape as equally important players, is that we have to base this in data. And there really has to be updated real-time data, particularly around families of younger children. What settings are they in? What settings do they want? And what is the placement that works for them? And so I would push us to refresh any data that is being used to inform planning, and if possible, get real-time family demand data. And the last, because this is such a pillar of some of the best work that UPK has done, is around quality. And I think this is also a time when we need to think expansively about the number and variety of ways that we can seek to build quality in a mixed delivery, community-based and school-based model. UPK is absolutely one very strong approach. Head Start's rich family support model is also a strong approach. The United Way shared services model, when you look at family childcare, is also very strong, as is the work of family childcare systems and early childhood support organizations. So I just want to make sure that we are looking at this in a really constructive and broad-based way. I always hope that as the city considers this work, that the voices of educators, families, and program providers, all those closest to the work and implementation, have their voices brought to the table in whatever way that happens. And the last thing I want to say just more broadly is that as the city considers continuing to expand its efforts, I do think it's vital that there be a strong voice and coordinating focal point inside of city government, in addition to the role that BPS plays, but inside of City Hall, the mayor's office, the leadership of the city council, because it is such a diverse system, it needs its own attention and assistance in coordinating, particularly vis-a-vis the state funding and how city work interfaces with the state funding level. So I am going to stop there because there's so much complexity here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I don't see Kate on the call, so we're going to go to Sharon Scott Chandler. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all the counselors. My name is Sharon Scott Chandler, and I'm Executive Vice President and COO at ABCD. And we appreciate the opportunity to discuss all this critical issue and all of the pieces of it, and your continued leadership, because I know this is not the first hearing that we've had on these issues over the years, and we really appreciate your leadership. As you may know, ABCD has been providing comprehensive whole child Head Start services to the community since the very first grant in 1965. And currently we serve 2,300 children across Boston and also in the Mystic Valley area, but primarily in Boston. And we've been involved in this UPK/Universal Access movement experience for the entire time. I mean, I think I've been at ABCD 22 years, and when I first came and ran Childcare Choices of Boston, the resource and referral agency, we started talking about it back then. Amy, we were right there, right? With Head Start, we also partner with several of the folks who are on the hearing today, Laura, Kate, and other childcare providers, to provide comprehensive Head Start services in childcare programs. There's been a national movement at the federal level to partner with childcare programs, have Head Start grantees partner with Head Start programs to provide grants and other resources, technical assistance around comprehensive services, family engagement, and the like. And so much of, I think, what the UPK model today, Tiara can probably attest, in the area of family engagement and comprehensive services is modeled a lot on the Head Start work that we've done and built. And so we're really proud of that. I think Laura really pointed out a lot of what I was going to say in terms of thinking about the broader system. We have been obviously very focused on preschool, but the 0 to 5 system is something that we need to really focus on at a city level. Again, Laura mentioned the mixed delivery system. Those of us in the community-based world know that that is the best, most comprehensive way to deliver services 0 to 5, because families are so different. Their needs are so different, from working families that need full 10 hours of care near their home or near their work, to family childcare providers who speak their language, who come from their culture. So the mixed delivery system for the youngest children and for families with the least resources is really the best way to deliver some sort of universal access to early childhood. It does come with complexities, though, and I think that we all sort of recognize it, and those who've been doing it for a while know, because there are, Amy mentioned, there are multiple funding sources and funding streams. There are multiple eligibilities for us. Universal is for everyone, but many of our programs focus on particular populations. So there's some challenges around that. Also, in terms of where programs come from. Programs are on the spectrum. Some have been doing this for a while and have large-scale infrastructures like Head Start, and we do. Some are individual family childcare providers. So the needs and the resources that each one of us has is different. So it's a complex system. But again, I go back to what Laura said, that if we can focus on it from a 0 to 5 systemic standpoint, I think we can really think about some of these challenges, think about the strengths, and provide the best system that we can in the city. I don't know how many of you may remember something called Thrive in 5, which began, a long time ago as really kind of a grassroots coalition and lots of meetings, and then it became a sort of an infrastructure at City Hall. I think that was a good example or model of many stakeholders coming together to think about the needs of children and families as well, 0 to 5. And so I'd encourage looking at and thinking about those things that were done and talked about, et cetera, during the Thrive and Five era, because there's a lot of lessons learned and a lot of things that we can pull from it as we move forward.
Sharon, was that it? I'm sorry, that was a pause there.
Yes.
I'm trying to get Kate.
I'm just looking at my notes, but I know that time is running out. So
I stopped listening for a moment because I'm trying to get Kate in on this call.
Oh, it's Kate.
If you are done, I will move to Marina, who I know is here, while I try to get Kate in.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George.
Say again?
Thank you for trying to get Kate in.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Like, where is that voice coming from? Sorry. The Zoom's gotten old.
I'm working on it too.
All right, I'll send her the link. I think I've got it.
Got it.
Okay, good afternoon, counselors and BPS folks and other constituents. My name is Marina Ostrov. I am a parent of 2 K2 students for this school year, and I am a Boston Public School teacher of 20 veteran years. And I am also a longtime resident of the city of Boston in the Dorchester neighborhood. My students attended a UPK program last school year in school year 1920. It was very exciting for them to be able to have this opportunity because they were 40th, 65th, and 88th on the waiting list for our neighborhood schools. And that is given the revision of the twin policy in BPS, where one twin immediately pulls in the other twin, which is newer. Previously, twins could have been assigned to different school buildings. So that's a nice change that twins automatically pull each other in. They had been attending preschool at the Little Voices Early Intervention and Care Center in Hyde Park. And it was with great excitement that year that center was able to apply for and obtain a UPK classroom. During the time that the Boston Public Schools was engaging parents in the UPK conversation, parents were promised a connector system. So one of the things that I worked on in school year 1920 was to make sure there was a connector system up and running. And to our great disappointment, there was not one up and running for the 1920 school year. So one of the things that I would really like to speak to that is extremely important to parents, and I have been in contact with many, many UPK parents at this point, trying to push this agenda item forward, is that it is essential to have a functioning connector system. Because what ended up happening in our K2 registration was, again, we did not get a seat at either of our 3 top choice schools. And it's lovely. They have ended up at a school building that we have been very happy at. But the process was extremely frustrating and extremely difficult to navigate. And one of the things that I continue to be very concerned about is that students enrolling in UPK classrooms are not considered Boston Public School students and do not have a right to a K2 seat. Whereas students who are enrolled in a K1 in a building have a seamless transition to K2 for the next school year, while the parents in the UPK classrooms have to struggle for a second year in a row in a lottery system. And I had reached out to Counselor C.B. George with help for this issue in the 1920 school year. And again, to many, many parents' great disappointment, that school year, the issue was never resolved. And we ended up back in the lottery. And so I have seen by following the UPK progression that there has been work done on the connector system. And it does look like a connector system is beginning to be functional. But I think that it is extremely important. I was looking at the demographics of UPK versus the Boston Public Schools. And I'm not sure these are 100% accurate, but they are from UPK slides and from the Boston Public Schools enrollment demographics. UPK is servicing 42% African American and Black students in K1, whereas Boston is only servicing 25% Black and African American students inside of K1 buildings. And so I am very concerned that we are going to create a system of haves and have-nots. And I am hoping that there will be equity in K-2 enrollment for all students, particularly students of color whose families have difficulty navigating the registration processes. Because I, as a Boston Public Schools teacher myself, found it to be very frustrating to navigate the process twice in 2 school years in a row. People who are not familiar with the process or are low-income families who struggle for time because they have so many things going on in their lives need assistance to connect to K-2 seats that is not frustrating and equitable. And another piece in that same observation that I made when looking at demographics, there are only 9% white students enrolled in UPK compared to 25% in K-1 seats at the Boston Public Schools. So that difference in demographics, 42% Black and African American to 9% white, or 25% white in the Boston Public School to 25% African American or Black. And it is worried that this is the main reason that I wanted to testify at this hearing, is to make sure that we are going to have equitable distribution of seats. And it is, now this is, I am stating an opinion, it would be more beneficial if it was K-1 across the board, regardless where the service was being delivered. And so if every student was considered a K-1 BPS student with equal access to all things that are given to each setting, including K-2 enrollment. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. And we have been joined by Kate Brand. Kate, welcome. Kate, you are now on my screen. If you would unmute yourself and you can offer your presentation. So perhaps we're having some additional difficulty. I also want to note that we have been joined by Councillor Flynn during the presentations. So I think at this point, we'll see if we can get Kate back, and we'll certainly give her an opportunity to share her thoughts. At this point, I'd like to turn our conversation over to my colleagues and start with the lead sponsor, Councillor Campbell. I will do a 5-minute timer, Councillor Campbell, just so you're aware of that. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks for having.
Thank you, Councillor Sabi-George, and thank you to all of our incredible panelists. I think it really speaks to not only the importance of having a varied stakeholder conversation in order for us to truly provide universal, and as Marina said, equitable access to universal pre-K in the city of Boston. So I really appreciate each and every panelist here and for your thoughts, observations, and where the city of Boston, frankly, can do better. And I think, Laura, you've said it explicitly, this is the time for the city of Boston to lead in this effort. We have the power, the authority to be able to convene all of the players and stakeholders to realize high quality, affordable, or free access to childcare, universal childcare and early ed. So thank you all so much. Because we only have a short amount of time, I have one question on, and this is the online hub conversation. Dinah brought this up from one of the parents, but it consistently comes up, how difficult it is to navigate the system to find out what is available to you as a parent in the city of Boston. I'm in the system, and I felt like it was a daunting task to sign up my 3-year-old for a pre-K seat and to do it early so I would have a better shot at winning the lottery. And we didn't win the lottery. So how do we, obviously there's one question on how we expand access overall, but currently what are the conversations on the city of Boston creating a centralized place for parents to go? And you can still be pregnant with your child and still want a place to go. So when your child is born, you already know what is available to you in terms of childcare and early ed. So that's one question. And then the second is on the infrastructure piece. How are we building out the infrastructure to be able to expand access for our families for programming from birth to 3? We've been talking a lot about 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and 3-year-olds, but clearly significant work to do between the birth and 3 structure. So that's my second question on just how are we building that infrastructure in terms of creating more opportunities, more programming, and access.
Can I just, I'm going to answer one part of your question, which is that at ABCD, the Child Care Resource and Referral Program and it's funded through the state, and it's been through its challenges dating back to the recession. But it is a place where parents can call to find out what is available 0 through school age. It is not, doesn't focus on the BPS availability and pre-K necessarily, but it is a broader system, both telephone, online, and in person, where families can find out what kind of early childhood settings are available for their children, and if a subsidy is available as well.
I would only add, Counselor, that I know we all yearn for a sort of universal one-stop shopping. You go to one place and all of your opportunities are laid out in front of you. And I think that is, a goal to continue to shoot for. But to Sharon's point and to some of the experiences in community and in programs, I think we have to have multiple points of entry. And I know that sounds contradictory to your navigation question, Councillor Campbell. But for example, with UPK's new School Mint system that is meant to be more accessible and create sort of a one portal entry, we still find that there are families that we have relationship with that we already know they are in our centers, and we have to be able to preserve that avenue of direct contact, and in some cases do the work for them to get them into the system. And I want to say that as we get more expansive and more aggressive, as we move into the family childcare network, Nurtury's family childcare system is almost entirely Latina-led, dual language, and with families and providers of different language abilities. We have to have multiple points of entry. So I will stop there.
And I agree with you, Laura, on the multiple points of entry. I just sort of think about one system that includes what Sharon was talking about, along with BPS, all in one place, even if it's the same system, but different points of entry, as being sort of the gold star. Because right now I'm finding folks don't really know where to go because there are so many systems in different systems. So what does it mean for us as all stakeholders to develop one comprehensive system with various entry points? But I'm taking a lot of notes on this. And I don't know if there's time for the infrastructure question. Can always.
If we can get to answering the infrastructure question, and then we'll move to Councilor Breeden. If anyone has some thoughts, Tiara, do you have thoughts on the?
I'm sorry, I just was going to ask, can you just clarify the question for me one more time? I think I lost track in some of the discussions, but.
Thank you. It was really looking at how are we expanding the infrastructure to be able to provide families access to programming and opportunities from birth to 3 years old.
Right. So, obviously our primary focus has been a lot on the 3 and 4-year-olds, but we also recognize our community partners as the experts. And so our work is really focused on Boston Opportunity Agenda has a 0 to 3 subcommittee that is really starting to build, I believe, the infrastructure, and the model for us is UPK. That includes a quality definition that they just created last week. But I really think that the truth is it should come from our community partners who are the experts in that, and Universal Pre-K be a partner in helping to, as you indicated, centralize communications, connect families. But our community-based organizations are really the experts to help us build that infrastructure, and UPK to be the partner in that.
So the other thing I would just add is I do think you do want a city agency with some level of authority and resources to make sure it happens equitably across the city. I think one of the nice things about UPK and the Boston Public Schools doing this work is that we can set a bar of quality, and we can help get people there and provide the supports and a level of equity. And so for 0 to 3, there really isn't anything like that. I know we've tried quasi versions of it. But and this is where I think BPS is a partner. I don't think the public schools should be in the process of overseeing 0 to 3 year olds, except for obviously with our responsibility for students with disabilities. But I do think that it has been a disruptor in a good way to have money, resources, and a city agency overseeing it in a way that is respectful of all the players. So I just think that's critical.
And I'll just take one other angle. I don't disagree with Jason at all, but I think that city function can live in a number of places that I think should be a conversation among the counselors and the mayors, both present and future. The other thing I just want to point to around infrastructure is that braided funding is going to be absolutely critical. And I would aspire to seamless funding. And I think with some of the federal money coming through, while it is one time, Amy O'Leary made a really good case for thinking expansively about that as a bridge, because children don't live in funding streams, but programs are forced to jump through multiple hoops of eligibility requirements, braiding. The decision that the state made not to allow consistent wraparound funding when UPK was first launched needs to be reviewed before we take on even more children and try and go even further down. And I wonder if there isn't an opportunity to engage in that conversation now with very strong advocacy from the city council and the mayor's office. And quite frankly, a lean and close observation about the way in that these robust federal funds are ultimately allocated. And so I would draw this to every city councilor's attention because that, I think, is where we can have the conversation around funding for infrastructure without the extraordinary barriers that programs have in trying to wedge children and their needs, particularly younger children and families who need 10-hour care. And I think this is the last thing I would really want to say is that we have to think long and hard about a model that pulls families away from the 10-hour care they might need in order to position them well for their school choice or, because they don't meet certain funding models. So it's a complex area, but I think it has to be a deep part of the planning here.
Just New York City actually created a position, just like Laura's referring to kind of create someone also with the Department of Education, which is their BPS, and pull those two positions together to figure out how to do cross funding. And certainly on our end, we've tried to braid the UPK funds with state dollars, but there's been challenges. So I think people who can help, and maybe we set a Boston rate, and if they want to give Boston money, there's a particular rate. I mean, I just think there's got to be some thinking in that area. So I would be happy to work with you all on that.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sachs and Laura, for that added information. Councilor Breeden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone. This has been a really, really important and informative discussion this afternoon. I would like to amplify the importance of the mixed delivery system. You know, so many of our family childcare providers, early education folks have provided essential childcare and their support for our essential workers through this pandemic. And it is of great concern to see that a huge number of family childcare providers are actually deciding to leave the field. And that's going to leave a huge gap in this mixed delivery system if we continue to lose family childcare providers. So I'm curious to know what sort of support can we scaffold to support the family childcare providers in recognizing that they have an important piece to play in this big puzzle that we're working with.
Counselor, I can tell you in our universal pre-K work that we are really trying to think deeply about how to include a fiscal threshold for family child care. And this morning we held a meeting with about 20 providers, some of them being family childcare. One of the things we know is important is to create a working group to make sure that the model we create is aligned with what they want and need. Everything from a needs assessment to what type of funding, how much funding do you need, and what is the funding for. So as of this morning, we're creating a working group, which will certainly include some of our UPK providers to think through family childcare. But you're right. In the meantime, what we can do and will do is offer their citywide opportunities for professional development, credit-bearing courses, supports for families, the Power of Parenting workshop through Families First. But you're right, we really do need to come up with an immediate solution and then a long-term solution for family childcare.
I think as well, we had a hearing on this. When did we have the hearing? Maybe last year. About this crisis in family childcare, especially, and one thing that came out was really the development of like a business education and entrepreneurship, and how to view their service as a business, and to make sure that a small family-based, home-based childcare can be a really an economic resource for the provider and their community. The other question I had on the slide, I'd love to get the slide deck. Can we share the slide deck? I'd love to have a copy of the slide deck. And there was the one about the distribution of places, the graph, and I know you focused on 5 neighbourhoods. Do you have those figures for the whole city by neighbourhood?
We have it for every neighbourhood. So
I really appreciate getting the numbers for Alston, Brighton, District 9, if that's possible.
Counselor, if I could just say one word on family childcare. Nurtury operates a very large system. And one of the things we found is that we actually increased our number of family childcare providers from pre-pandemic to now. We have the largest number that we've ever had. And one of the things is we began offering additional technical assistance, additional income generating opportunities. We offered them training to begin doing remote learning. So I would say back to the infrastructure question that Councillor Campbell raised, that's going to be critical, whether it's a system, whether it's the terrific work that has been happening out of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement with a small group that should be scaled, but bringing in child support organizations and family childcare systems, keeping in mind that a tiny provider with 6 children, if they wanted to get into the UPK system, they would be the caregiver, the proposal writer, the budgeter, the coach. And so that is, so we need to think about scale in order to leverage the rich diversity, the cultural relevance and resonance, the COVID-friendly small environments, all the things that are making family childcare could make it incredibly vital, but it needs a different kind of platform. And I know Tiara is thinking about this, but it is a huge nut to crack. And those of us who are already in that work, I think would be important voices in that planning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think that technical assistance is vitally important, because many of these childcare are solo operators, and they've managed to keep going all the way through this COVID crisis. It's really quite phenomenal. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just perfect. There goes the clock. Thank you, Councillor Braden. Next, we have Councillor Mejia, and then we'll have Bach, Edwards, and Flynn, just for order. Councillor Mejia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I just want to give a quick little shout out to Dinah. I'm really happy to hear the parent voice in this space. And I think that a lot of the things that Dinah brought into this space are things that I struggled with as a parent. There is this whole notion in terms of like who can afford to send their child to early childhood care. There were times where I had to reduce my amount of hours just so that I can qualify for a voucher. And then what that does is put families in further financial hardship. So we really need to look at that model overall in terms of just kind of how it works. I just want to name that. And I also think that I love Marina's comment. She was bringing in that data. Thank you. And underscoring the whole conversation around the inequities, because I do think in many ways that childcare needs to be seen also as through a civil rights lens. Because if we're really talking about children up for success. We know that if young people, if we can get them earlier, that they'll have a better outcome. So it's just a no-brainer. And the fact that we're even having this conversation, to me, is just like, I'm excited about it, but I'm also sad that we even have to fight for it. So just want to put that out there. It shouldn't be a luxury or an option. It should actually just be a mandate. That every child will have a quality seat as early as the world deems so. So I think I just want to name that. But I wanted to just quickly follow up with Tiara's point from earlier. It's really great to see in the second year that there are dual language services. And can you just talk a little bit about what outreach to parents looks like, specifically parents who speak languages other than English? Are there parent cafes available in other languages?
Yes. Thank you so much for your question. And I'm going to try and remember everything. Yes, there are parent cafes offered in different languages. We actually work with the provider to do that. So for example, at BCNC, we use the family engagement coordinator to work with the Countdown to Kindergarten so that we could offer the parent cafe in Chinese. And we did the same thing at Viet Aid. But we also made sure that we sent individual letters to each family in their language. We made sure that we sent phone call reminders, what were they called? Phone blast out to all of our families in their native language as well. And then not only that, but we're translating our curriculum in Vietnamese and Chinese this year, and our community-based programs are doing that for us. And it's going to be citywide, so it's open source and families will be able to benefit from it. And then Families First is translating their Power of Parenting workshop. United Way is working with us to think through the ASQ screening tools. And there's one other thing I'm forgetting, but yes, we're constantly thinking through dual language and working really closely with the Office of English Language Learners. And lastly, we did also have a Viet Aid, right? We had a K2 pilot to really look at ways, right? Jason, you want to talk a little about that?
Basically, we had a K1, which was the community-based UPK program. And then that community center housed the K2, which is now moved on to the Mather. So there was a partnership. So, and I think we're going to do more trans-adaption. I think we're working with the Office of English Language Learners to think about, because now the curriculum goes from pre-K all the way to second grade. And there are structures and curriculum structures all the way throughout. And so that children will have sort of a seamless educational experience and routines that they start in pre-K and will have all the way through second grade. So, and languages, obviously dual language programs are a big piece of that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And then another question here is, I'm just curious, for the 11% of pre-K students who are learning remotely, I'm just curious about what their access to internet has been like. And also curious if you could just talk to me a little bit about the social and emotional learning for students and kind of what has been put in place to support our most vulnerable learners under COVID.
Sure. So at the beginning of this last year, with Children's Hospital funding, we shifted our grant to ensure that every UPK child had a tablet, every teacher had a laptop, every director had a laptop. And so we went into universal pre-K understanding that our children would need access. And then, of course, you run into broadband challenges, right? And so programs were able to apply through the Equity Fund to address any broadband access challenges they had. And in addition to that, you asked about social emotional, and we really used Boston Medical Center and Strive to offer a series of workshops, trauma-informed coffee hours for families, and then the same for educators. So it didn't come directly from Universal Pre-K. We really branched off and used our partners at Strive to offer the social emotional supports. And we're going to continue that, right? It needs to go into this year and ensuring that we're offering that for educators and families.
That's great. Thank you. And then one comment that I wanted to make about Amy's testimony is that I think it's such a great point to highlight that we need policy and procedure changes. So it's not just, I think we need to look at the whole entire gamut in terms of how we're going to redesign and reimagine pre-K. I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And I would love, to Dinah's point, in terms of family voices, I'm really happy to hear that there has been more engagement in that that process. But I think as we continue to have this dialogue, centering it on the families and kind of what it's like for them to navigate is crucial. And you could do that through surveys. And I would also venture to say that not all parents are connected. Not all parents are checking their emails, and not all parents have smartphones. So I think in terms of the outreach, we need to think beyond just kind of like the general ways that we do business, like, and that would include engaging barbershops, hair salons, like really thinking outside of the box, because there are a lot of children who are not signed up for pre-K that could be, but because families don't know the importance of it, that's just kind of like another place for you all to be able to engage families and also solicit feedback in terms of why aren't they, pursuing it, and what are some of the cultural barriers that they're facing as it relates to that. But we don't even have enough seats, so why even think about how we're going to get these seats, right? So we have to first build the bench before people can sit in it. And then I just love the idea of providing training and stipends for family members to take on the role of care providers and promoting more community spaces. I think that is crucial, and I just want to underscore that as a workforce development strategy in terms of really creating opportunities for parents to step into these roles. It's a win-win for many reasons, and I think it's something that the city should consider investing in developing that pipeline. And I'm happy to have that conversation as the chair of workforce development and what that could potentially look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach.
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thanks so much to the UPK team and everyone. This has been really informative already, and I just echo everyone's interest in the topic and hope that we really can get to the U in UPK, right? The universal goal. I guess just a couple of bird's eye view questions. So one is just, and I think this was sort of on your slides already, so I'm sorry, Jason and Tiara, but how many seats we have in our school buildings, how many seats we have in these community-based, how many we're adding next year? Amazing. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So and Jason, I don't know if you want to talk us through this again, but the blue, do you want to do it, Jason, or you want me to?
Sure. But I was just wondering, I guess this is as good as any. So again, how many children are in the city of Boston is a moving target. It's probably up to 6,000 kids. But if you see if it was free and it was accessible, how many people would use it? And now, mind you, this does not include charter schools or Catholic schools, but Catholic schools are private, but anyways, you got to pick a line. So we picked K2 as kind of the universal line, and that's roughly about 4,000 kids. And so as you can see here, it looks like we have roughly 3,100 seats or 3,127 seats, right? And we can expand more. So it seems like we're about 400-ish seats missing, maybe up to 800 seats missing, but it always depends on the neighborhood and family's choice. If we move into 3-year-olds, then we really are expanding that number to thousands. And so we would have to think about how to build it. But if you look at capacity, there's plenty of community-based program capacity. But then the effort is, okay, do they want to buy into the system? Do they want to participate in coaching curriculum? Do they having a teacher with a bachelor's degree that's compensated the public schools? Some programs don't want to do that. And so it's sort of like matching the program with the product, which is a high quality program that has no wrong door. And so this is sort of the balancing act we'll have to do neighborhood by neighborhood. But we're not, certainly as far as the Boston Globe has sort of said, we're a couple thousand off. We're not that far off. We think it's more like fine tuning the programs and the families and outreach and the connector and some of the things that we've talked about. And I did want to say that the connector is functional, and it started, I think, in September of this year. So anyways, I want to take your time.
No. Well, it's important. So I guess, right. So am I right in understanding, if I'm a parent who wants my 4-year-old to go to high quality pre-K and I don't want to pay for it.
Right.
If I find you guys, if I find the connector, and if I have no other preferences, that's obviously very rarely going to be true, right? But like if I had no other preferences about like where these seats are, et cetera, like I would get a seat today.
We should be able to provide, I would say for the most cases, yes, there might be a neighborhood or two where there is, because remember, community-based programs are not 100% enrolled. So odds are we could find you a space. But I don't want to say guaranteed 100%, but I would say it would 80%, 90% likelihood that we could find you a space. But the trick is it's always a relationship between the public schools enrollment and, you know, the choice system there and what is available in the community, and then which community-based providers apply to be in the program, and then where they are in the quality threshold. But I would say we are getting probably between 80 and 90% likelihood that you would get a space. And we would certainly, like, if we heard like of a neighborhood that really needed it, then we would do much more targeted outreach. You know, but we know that there are parents who didn't know about it, and that's why we're tracking down. And then there are people on the BPS wait list that we've called. Our staff have called them all and said, hey, you've got a community-based space. Do you want to go to it? And I think there's only been like one or two instances where the community-based provider was like, no. And we were like, why not? And so, but for the most part, community-based providers have taken them on and it hasn't been an issue. But I know Tiara or anybody else, Joelle, wanted to speak to that.
I would just say your question really is about like, what is the infrastructure? Who is the air traffic controller? Who is the wizard behind, like, what does the family want? And let me find out how I can do it. The equity piece around, you know, Boston Public Schools is a free public school program for 6 hours a day. So coming up with that. So it is, we give word problem answers to simple data questions because as Sharon said, the complexity of the way the system is currently funding, it begs that if you really looked at it as a full system forward facing to families to say, what do you need? And then all this work behind the scenes to match up all the resources that are available, that would probably lead to less frustration. And that's easy for me to say as a state advocate. Sorry, guys. But, you know, that's what we're thinking about for communities, because many of the funding streams come with requirements or, you know, eligibility. And so we know all that. It can make it very hard for a family to say, this is all I want. Can you please help me find out where it is? Which also, I think with the city census that's happening in Boston, you know, you're the first city to do that, to really understand. And as Jason said, the data is moving, you know, as families are thinking about, you know, it's hard to track, but building in that kind of infrastructure would help lead to less time on the other end, trying to families to navigate that system.
And can Jason or Tiara, I mean, can you speak a bit to the point that was raised about the fact that, you know, if my kid has a seat in the physical BPS, I've got to I now know that I've got a path. And if I don't, I don't. Because I think I certainly hear that a lot as well. And I know that when I think I had raised it with you a year or two ago, one of the things you said was the concern is like, you know, we already have an issue where our like most connected, knowledgeable parents are the ones who sign up for things. And we already have that problem vis-a-vis like overall school enrollment. And if we push that back to being like the most connected parents for the kids at age 3, like maybe that's part of the problem. But at the same time, I'm just trying to think through it. It seems hard to imagine that if we really get to this like universal place that we're going to keep a 2-tiered system in terms of access. I don't know. It doesn't strike me as tenable. So where's your thinking on that?
So that's how we built the connector.
Yeah.
You want to go, Tiara?
Yeah, just to really highlight, Councilor Brock, that we did launch the connector in September of 2020, which means that our UPK students receive priority before anyone for UPK seats in that. And it starts with low income. So you mentioned, we sort of talked about avoiding families gaming the system. What it allows is that low income UPK families get first priority and then non-low income families. And if there is an excess seat, meaning like 1 K1, 2 K2s, we have seats in all of those 2 K2s. Does that make sense? So we have found any additional seats in Boston Public Schools and pulled half of those as priority for UPK. Our UPK children get selection first, and then those seats are released to the general public. So we have prioritized our UPK students. The Schoolman system allows us to communicate directly to the BPS system. And we were able to eliminate the pre-registration process for families. They got a letter that said, good morning, Tiara, you're a UPK family. You're eligible for the connector. Here's a map that shows you all the connector schools that you're eligible for. And we have handled the pre-registration for you. Here's a registration number. So all you need to do is go into the Welcome Center or have a virtual appointment, and we'll walk you through all of your schools as well as your connector options. So we have created the system so that UPK children have priority.
And then I just want to add that superintendent, school committee, all the planning, enrollment, budget has been really supportive of this. It was a monumental change to get the school district to think of beyond its own system, but we had to work within their rules-based enrollment system. And so that literally took us 2.5 years. To
really
do.
5, but yes.
Well, but I mean, really, like once we started to work in earnest, and it took leadership. So again, back to this kind of city and leadership and all of your roles is you need to tell us to do it, and then we'll figure it out. And it's the same way with blending funds. And it's really complicated. And to get these systems to really respond takes leadership. And then because Tiara and I and others were engineers, but someone has to say, do this and make it a priority. And so the connector we believe will work. I'm sorry, counselor, Sabi George, that it was not working and you heard that it wasn't functional, because it is functional. So we would love to hear more about why it wasn't functional.
It was the first year.
Well, I'm happy as it's my turn now for the next round of questions. But the connector didn't work that first round. Many families were left behind, and that was certainly Marina's experience, and it was an unfortunate experience, but one that we really should have been ahead of. And certainly we can't just simply look back, but what happened has to inform the work going forward. And I'm grateful, and hundreds of families are grateful that the system now works for students and for our children across the district. For my questions, which are brief, and then we'll go to a second round of questions. I've got 3 of them. I'll offer them, and if we could be sort of brief with the experience, as we're almost hitting our 2-hour mark. How is the training and pay for teachers who are UPK teachers, especially in our community-based organizations? Is that teacher turnover that we saw in the presentation, is that similar to, I asked the question because I think I know the answer, but is that similar to regular BPS turnover? And then the curriculum that's used in UPK programs, is that informed at all in what students will, in what our kids will receive when they enter sort of the traditional K-12 system? Is there a collaboration and connection between that curriculum in a UPK classroom and what will be happening in K-12?
I'll start with the turnover one, because that, and then Tiara, you do the rest. So,
you should also probably talk about the curriculum as well and how it goes up. But go ahead.
So for turnover, and again, before I had this job in an earlier incarnation of my life, I actually was the guy who looked at turnover rates in the city of Boston through a grant. In the Boston Public Schools, as I recall, when we were doing this measure, it was about 5%. And in community-based programs, like I said, it's traditionally around 35%. UPK has lowered that number considerably. So even 18% in COVID times, it's probably like 12 to 15%. So salary does make a difference. And in community-based programs, they do not have the resources to pay their teachers as much. So UPK has been an equity and a compensation disruptor in a good way. It's also forced us to give more money.
UPK teachers, in community-based organizations are being paid.
They get paid the starting salary as a public school teacher.
Yes.
So do they follow? Are they part of the collective bargaining unit?
They are not. So they start there.
They're starting at the base salary, but not aligned with steps and lane increases.
No, they are not. But we allow the programs, obviously, when we do it, we make recommendations of how much it should increase. But no, they are not unionized and they are not part of the collective bargaining agreement. And it has been a source of tension, again, for community-based providers, because how do I pay my other teachers this?
Right.
And my director needs a bump and my assistant teacher. So we've allowed all of those things. And we continue to support that because it's critical for the stability and sustainability of the field. Now, do you want me to talk about the curriculum, TR?
Or just, I think your question, Counselor, was about the curriculum evidence-based, and is it the same as what they experience going into BPS?
Yes. So we have been widely researched, and there's been a lot of research in part generated by us, but also because there's huge national interest because this program seems to be scaling well. It's one thing to do like a couple high scope studies where kids do well all the way to now I think they're 40 years old. But what we've been able to do is for thousands of kids. And basically, when we first started the research, the public schools had a really strong effect size and really improved students' gains by about 6 months. So we tested out in community-based programs. What we found is we got about half as much gains in community-based programs, but it was harder to sustain. Since then, we've now put a lot more infrastructure, this Tiara and her entire team, and we've been studying the quality, and that's sort of the implementation science grant. And the rub is it can be just as high quality in community-based programs. It just needs the supports and it's the variability. So I think the answer is students will do well in community-based settings and in public schools, and we have enough data to support that contention. What we are seeing, and this gets back to sort of the curriculum alignment, is after kindergarten, you see sort of a fade out effect, kindergarten, first and second grade. We do see that the investment in UPK makes a difference all the way to third, fifth grade in the Boston public schools, but you lose some. And you lose some in our hypothesis because you're not offering a high quality scope sequence curriculum. And so since 2012, we have written now a scope and sequence curriculum that is aligned, and we are studying the impact on that. And we are finding that this scope and sequence curriculum does reduce some of that fade out, and students are doing better. So you can't just do UPK, like we're talking birth to three, you also have to do public school reform. And that's really kind of what we've been doing and where I spend most of my time with my staff. So hold the public schools accountable to pre-K through second or third to make sure that the investment makes it all the way to MCAS.
Oh yeah, no. And that's such a critical point. That fourth grade has always been important, but we see how important all of these early efforts are. And, just want to reiterate how important that partnership is between the UPK teachers and the Boston Public Schools teachers, and sort of those classrooms there needs to be, we have the connector, but there also needs to be connections between educators so that there is this, and I love, we've used the word seamless, I'm looking at my notes here a couple of times, seamless funding, seamless partnerships, seamless educational experiences, that those components are so critical to a student's success. And, I know that, we in this discussion today, in this hearing today, are all on the same page. But as we talk more about how important that is and how critical those relationships are between people and between groups of kids, it's really great. Thank you for that. That's it for me. Councilor Campbell, or any other colleagues that have a second round of question, just being mindful that we are approaching 2 hours.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. I'll just ask I'll make one comment that was made earlier about the importance of just doing a better job of internal communication. All the departments that are touching this issue on the City of Boston side that don't necessarily talk or communicate frequently. So just wanted to lift that up because it truly is important. My last question, and I know this is ongoing given looking at the time, is the federal dollars. City of Boston is obviously getting millions, Boston Public Schools getting millions, and we're going into budget season. But what percentage of those dollars that are going to BPS are being used to expand access to quality care? What percentage of those dollars are being used to create greater infrastructure for the birth to three sort of gaps that currently exist? That's my last question.
So I don't know is the answer to that. I think that's a good question. We can get back to you. I think what you want to know is how much investment birth to 3 and then is going to early childhood in the public school system. I just want to make sure we get to the question.
Whether it's through the public school system or the mixed delivery model, anything that touches universal pre-K. It could be training. It could be small business support for early ed providers, for example, right? Some of the small businesses that do this work. So anything that touches early ed and childcare. Be curious to know what percentage of the federal dollars that we're receiving is going to that.
And just to show specificity for your answer, how old do you want us to go? I get you want 0 to 5, but how do you want it to go to 3rd grade, 2nd grade? What do you want it to go to?
So just focusing on birth to 5.
Okay.
So yeah, exactly. And so there was a figure that, maybe BPS was getting $400 million. Obviously, the city of Boston as a whole is getting a lot more than that. So they may be looking at the 400 million or so, or whatever it is that BPS is getting, but also the city as a whole is getting. How much of that federal infusion of money that we're getting is going towards these efforts?
Okay.
And then
really good question.
Yeah. And then what are we doing with it?
Right. I think I was actually on the Boston Ed Funders call this week with the superintendent, and that question did come up, at a similar, what's happening with the funding. And part of the challenge that I pointed out is the early ed funding goes from the state through the department to programs or through grants, right? So that question is even more important about how is the $510 million for the American Rescue Plan going through EEC. The legislature has to appropriate. So understanding that the processes are different, but that's no excuse for not knowing kind of that how much funding do we have to support children and families from birth through whatever age range you went to.
I will tell you that DESE released a remote early childhood grant that we applied and received $480,000, and that's going to be for summer school learning kits for kids using summer school. And we're also combining that effort with UPK, and also the YMCA also has their own funding, and they're going to be serving 700 additional kids. But that's a specific example. You're asking a larger one. We'll get you an answer to.
And Counselor, if I can just say, I just want to underscore, I know you guys know how to figure out the city money and the BPS money, but I want to raise an important point about paying attention to the distribution of the state money directly to childcare. What Amy was just talking about, your voices can be incredibly important here. 2 points for you to know. One is that money is not going to arrive in programs. The December package won't arrive in programs until July. The Biden March ARP package won't arrive until October. A lot of us are struggling from now until then.
Right.
And it's very, very hard to plan budgets. And so I just want to mention that the notion of bridge funding, or in some ways, what the Boston Resiliency Fund did for those of us who pivoted quickly to open emergency care, might be something you all want to inquire. I'm not trying to take more out of your pot, but these are for programs in your city. So I think that is something to consider. And then the other is to be advocates. The legislature has been incredibly supportive of childcare funding. The executive office plays a very important role in how the supplemental budget goes through the legislature. And I think it's very important that you raise your voices about the importance of that being maximized into a direct program and the kinds of infrastructure that you're talking about. So please be vigilant on that. We will need your
absolutely advocacy. No, absolutely. This is great. And part of my question was really getting at the piece of it is there's that short-term relief that people are already going to need right now to sort of sustain them until they're able to get future funding. Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Oh, perfect timing. And we do have additional comment and question from Councilor Mejia and Councilor Bach. I personally have a hard stop, so I'd like to turn the rest of this hearing over to the lead sponsor, who's also Vice Chair of the Education Committee, Councilor Campbell. So we'll go to Councilor Mejia. And you are all in very good hands with Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi-George. I'll go 5 minutes to Councilor Mejia, 5 minutes to Councilor Bach, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Mejia.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Sabi George. I actually don't have any further questions. I just want, I didn't have my hand up, but since I have the mic, I just want to say thank you to the administration and to everyone who participated in this conversation. I'm looking forward to the next steps and rolling up my sleeves and going after those dollars that we need to make all of this happen. So thank you so very much for all your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Bach.
Yeah, just two things. I mean, one is just to say that I think, as you alluded to, Councillor Campbell, it is budget season. And I think one of the things we've been clear with BPS that we will also be chasing in our hearings with them is about the federal funding and what their plan is for that. And I agree with you that if you don't actually chunk it out and ask, well, what are we doing for 0 to 5? It's very easy for us to miss 0 to 5, I think, with those with those sort of extra dollars. So I appreciate that question. I think we can take it back up in the budget hearings. The district counselor question I had for Tiara and Jason is just, I have a district that really is challenged by a lack of schools. In particular, if you're in the Fenway, you're about as far from an elementary school as anybody in the city. And it's hard for us to create those visible pathways into BPS for folks. It's not that everybody, as we know, in the city gets a neighborhood school, but it's just a question of do you see options that are even less than 2 miles away? Mm-hmm. And so I think when we first talked at the beginning of my term, one of the things that I was thinking about is there a way for these UPK seats and the kind of partnership with the community-based organizations to be a bridge that gives people that first sense of BPS is in my neighborhood and there's a road into a school. And so, but I'm still not sure that I feel like you guys are working with community-based providers, like you've said, based on their appetite, based on how close they are to these thresholds you're trying to reach, et cetera. I don't feel like necessarily that geographic need that I feel in the district is what's driving the process. And so I guess I just kind of wanted to ask about the degree to which you guys talk with the district about that stuff, about sort of filling gaps, geographic gaps, and where there's an on-ramp into BPS, and to what extent you are able to kind of target collaboration with folks in particular neighborhoods.
Tiara, do you want to go? You want me?
Yeah, I mean, I would just start by saying you're right. We only have one community-based organization in the Fenway area, which is our YMCA RTH. For every seat that they say they need available, we're prepared to fund. And that's how we've been doing it, is they'll say we have another 4-year-old and we'll fund the space. But it may not be 2 miles within 2 miles for your families. So that I think is where the challenge is. And we'll continue to seek programs in that area, encourage them to apply for UPK. But it sounds like one of the things we need to consider is, what if the program doesn't become a UPK program? How do we make sure that there's still that connector for them into BPS? And so, Jason, I think one of the things I would say is we definitely could go back and talk to Boston Public Schools about the K-2 option, but I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Well, I mean, this morning we were on a call trying to recruit new providers to the UPK world. And, if you could push whoever you think wants to do it in that direction, I still think BU Wheelock is kind of the perfect partner in this, just because they're there and they have expertise in early childhood and they seem to be wanting to form an identity and a partnership in the community. So that's one place. I think I was struck in your community meeting by families saying, we're going to leave the city if you don't solve this. Mm-hmm. When our kids get 3, we bail because we just don't see access to the public schools. So I do think it's an important thing. And I've delivered that message, but I think we need probably a more coordinated effort, particularly with BU and Wheelock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, BU Wheelock has their institutional master plan up. So they've actually just been sort of forming, reaching out to neighborhood stakeholders. And I feel like it's the first time that they're really the new entity is really entering the community in that way. So this has definitely been on the top of my radar, but I think it's just something that we all should connect more about. So I'm very distracted now by Councilor.
I know.
Baby. So I will.
Aiden has some things to say about care and
tell us what's up, man.
So I will yield the floor to Aiden. Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. I think now we'll go to public testimony because I think all colleagues have exited. So is there any public testimony?
I believe we did have one, but she may have signed off, so I think we can move on.
Okay. Well, I will thank everyone again for being here today, of course, for all of your work. It's not an easy time in the midst of COVID. That's right. And this clearly, we have a lot more work to do, and we'll continue that in partnership, of course. And Aiden agrees he'll join those conversations too. But really appreciate each and every one of you. I want to give a special shout out to Central staff again for hosting these hearings. They're the people behind the scenes. And then Ellie, my chief of staff, thank you for all the work and coordinating all of you guys. So thank you so much. Everyone stay safe and healthy, and the hearing is adjourned. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.